In this video, I am going to build a 10-foot white oak dining table with 2 leaf sections. I begin with 8/4 white oak, 10 feet long and varied widths. From each board, I make 2 cuts at 36 inches and 1 cut at 48 inches to glue together for the top sections. After the glue up is dry, I will cut the 48-inch sections down to 24 inches to make the leaves. I cut these from a total of 8 boards for the tabletop. After cutting the boards to length, I take them to the table saw to rip them to width, trying to get the most from them, cleaning up as many imperfections as I can. Next, I use the planer to take them down to 1.5 inches thick. I then move over to the jointer to clean the saw marks from the edges of the stock. This is crucial for good clean glue-up seams. Next, I prepare the boards to glue them up into slab sections for the top. There are 3 sections in all. When the table has the leaves in place, it will be 4 feet wide by 10 feet long. When they are removed, it will be 4 feet by 6 feet. The sections will be 4 feet by 3 feet that will make up the 2 main sections of the top. One section will be 4 feet by 4 feet that I will then cut in half to make the 2 leaves. I was going to use biscuits to line them up and the glue up, but I have found it isn't very accurate for a good, clean alignment. The lumber I had to work with was 121 inches at length, so that didn't leave much wiggle room by the time I have to subtract the saw curves to get the cuts I needed for the 10-foot top. So, after weighing my options, I decided to get a dual spindle dowel joiner from Grizzly in place of the biscuit joiner. Theoretically, as long as the dowels are accurately placed, it should line up the boards the way I needed it for a flat and even panel. The dowel joiner, being a cheap tool that it is, had a bit to be desired. But I was able to tinker with it and make a few adjustments, and I was able to turn it into a pretty precise tool. All that said, I drill the boards for the dowels and get the job done. When I get the dowel holes drilled, I begin setting up the work table to glue the boards together. I start by laying down the paper that my dowel joiner came shipped in on the work table to collect most of the glue from the squeeze out. I then add masking tape to my parallel clamps to ensure they don't get more glue on them than I can clean off. After that, I lay out the boards in the order that I want to glue them up to see if I would be satisfied with how they looked. I then set the boards on edge to apply the glue. I start by daubing a little glue in the dowel holes and insert the dowels. After I get the dowels in, I add glue to the edges. With a generous amount of glue applied, I then place each board in their place and gingerly coax them together with a gentle persuader. I then proceed to tighten the clamps, closing all gaps and squeezing out the glue I had just added. I added pipe clamps to the top to help ensure a flat panel by countering the force of the parallel clamps. Adding the dowels definitely paid off, getting the panel in perfect alignment. After I remove the panels from the clamps, I lay them out and square them up using a track set up for my circular saw. I then lay all the panels in line to trim the edges to width and ensuring they are square with each other and the edges are even for the entire length. After marking reference lines across the length of the panels, I begin drilling holes with the dowel joiner for the alignment pins to keep the top sections lined up when the table is extended or the leaves are removed. Next, I begin making the legs. I start with 8/4 white oak and rip it 3.5 inches wide. I then run it through the planer to create a clean surface to glue them together two at a time. Next, I cut them to length, leaving them a little long to clean them up after they are joined in glue up. The next step is to glue them together two at a time to make 4 legs. I later decided to make a 5th leg for the center for extra support, as this table will have leaves that can be removed to bring the table length down to 6 feet and will be very heavy when it is extended. I let the glue up set overnight and remove them from the clamps the next day, and then run them over the jointer to square them up. I then trim them on the table saw to make the sides parallel, afterwards running them through the planer to make all 4 sides equal. Then I take them back to the miter saw, square the end and cut them to final length. Here I begin working on the profile. I start with a 1.25 inch cove bit. I made this cut in a couple of passes because one pass is too much to hog out at once. This is where I raise the bit for the second pass. Next, I change out the router with a V-bit, cutting a V-groove above the cove and one underneath it. I had to make a taper jig, as the material is a little thick for the blade to cut all the way through with a conventional jig. This will be a one-time use jig specific to this project. I have to taper all of the sides. A couple sides can be cut lying flat on the jig. The other sides, I use scrap cut-offs to shim them to finish the cuts I need. I go through this whole process to make all 5 legs. After forming the legs, I spend an hour or so sanding off the saw marks. I won't show much of that as it gets pretty boring. I then begin planning out the mortises to attach the skirting to the legs. I built this mortising jig for this project. If you are interested in how it was made, you can find the video I made of the build. These legs are too big to use the jig as it is. All is not lost, as I was still able to use the platen assembly from the jig to turn my work table into a mortising jig. I use the marks I laid out on the legs to line them up to the centering marks in the platen. From there, I am able to set it up to cut the mortises. I put the router in place and start setting up the travel limits to the length needed for the mortises. I use the marks I drew earlier to set the stops for the router cuts. I start hogging out the depth of the mortise, taking several steps until I reach 1.5 inches deep. Since the stops on the platen are set where I need them, I just simply flip over the leg to cut the mortise on the adjacent side. I repeat these steps for the other 3 legs. Originally, I was going to cut mortises into the ends of the skirts to use floating tenons, but I decided to cut tenons on the skirts instead. I added a dado stack to the table saw and began cutting them. Next, I take them to the bandsaw to cut the shoulders of the tenons. I then use the 1-inch belt sander to round over the tenons to fit the mortises. Perfect fit. I put a chamfer bit in the router to cut chamfers in the legs to receive leg bolts for added strength in the build. I then drill pilot holes for the leg bolts. I add an 1/8 inch round over to soften the edges of the skirts. I then attach the skirts to the legs. It's beginning to take the form of a table. After getting the legs and skirts the way I want them, I then begin to cut miters on the corners of the top, not only for design but also to lower the danger of injury if a kid or grandkid hits their head. I turn the top halves over to fit them for the slides. I attach the legs and skirts with brackets that are designed to allow the top to expand and contract when humidity and temperature changes without causing any damage to the top. I then cut spacers from scrap plywood to line up the tracks for installation. After they are in line, I secure them in place with 2-inch screws. This is only temporary as I will disassemble it to turn it back over again to round over the edges and sand the surface to prepare for stain and lacquer. I have already done an 1/8 inch round over on the underside, and here I add a 1/4 inch round over on the top side. I then spend a few hours sanding, but I didn't video that part because, well, it's just sanding. This is where I do a preliminary assembly before I stain and finish. This is just a slideshow section as this video is getting pretty lengthy. I then stain the parts and let it dry for a couple of days. Afterwards, I spray sanding sealer and sand to a smooth finish and then apply 2 more coats of precat dull rub lacquer. This really brings out the character of the wood and makes the grain pop. If you like this kind of content and would like to see more videos like this, be sure to hit that like, subscribe, and feel free to leave a comment, good, bad, or ugly, and I will catch you in the next one.